I'm Jim Czek.
And I'm Renee Merrifield.
And we're here with Beyond the Ballot. And I think we may have one of the biggest political stories of our lifetimes that's happening in the United States, which affects us all because the United States is the most powerful country in the world, both from an economy perspective and from a military perspective and from their currency. And that story that's kind of been broken, I mean, most people already kind of recognize, but it's been broken by Jake Tapper of CNN with his book, which was done with Alex. I forget that guy's name all the time. Alex is co-written, and it's called Original Sin. And it really outlines the cover-up, which Jake Tapper was actually complicit in. And he went on Megyn Kelly's show, and Megyn Kelly did not hold back. She went after him pretty good. I don't know if you watched that segment with Megyn Kelly.
I did not watch that one. No, I ended up missing. So you'll have to fill me in on that one. I just said before we started, what would you ever do if I said I haven't watched that?
She held his feet to the fire because there was that one interview that Jake Tapper did with Laura Trump there, where Laura Trump was kind of outlining where Biden's was showing some mental acuity problems, and he just basically shamed her and said, "How dare she?" And that was kind of like the path of the left to actually shame you into speaking out and stuff like that. But lots of revelations in the book. Jake Tapper also stood up for Hunter Biden so many times, and then he's calling him now a sleazeball and all this thing. And it sounds like there was 5 people running the United States. And it was Hunter Biden was one of them, and Jill Biden, and a few of the aides were running the country.
Yeah, and this really is a truly remarkable story. And it was one that, in terms of the gaslighting element that was done by the media and the cover-up that was done by those that were in charge, I think is really one of the reasons that we have such an erosion of trust by the general public. Because what they were seeing every time President Biden spoke, every time he did, he was caught, flat-footed, every time, and I wasn't talking about the tripping incidents, but I mean, you saw reel after reel after reel of incidents where he is clearly not well, where his mental capacity and coherency was so out of skew that truly the general public was like, how could both of these two things be true? And I think that what happened, I think there needs to be charges pressed at a certain point because of the amount of power that was given to unelected officials in and with those complicit actions.
Yeah, we can't forget that a proxy war was started under the Biden administration. And so they have, and it's been recognized now by all outlets, really, I mean, on both sides, that this is a proxy war with the United States and Russia, and Ukraine happens to be their sandbox where they're carrying out this atrocious war, where it's said now that over 5,000 lives are lost a week right now in that atrocious war.
Yeah. I'm going to also talk about the billions and billions and billions of dollars that are not accounted for through the Biden administration that went to, the Ukraine, either through other agencies or through other companies, et cetera, et cetera. We are talking about massive amounts of money. And remember when President Zelensky said, well, I haven't received that amount of money. I've only received this amount of money. And he had a different dollar figure. And everyone was kind of like, well, what about what the U.S. is saying that they've sent, and the Europeans have sent, what they've sent, and where is this money all going? Man, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it probably is a duck, and we need to know exactly what happened there. And I mean, not just from a U.S. perspective, but from a global perspective, because if that's happening in the U.S., it's certainly happening with the rest of the dollars that are being spent by other countries around the world.
The dangerous part of this whole thing, like when you look at Watergate, which was a big scandal, the media was after that. In this case, the media is complicit. And even our national media here in Canada did the same thing. Like if you dared speak out, I mean, I had arguments with local reporters, when I would say questioning his mental acuity and, this is a danger to the world. And, told that I'm a Trumpist and stuff like that. I'm just like, two things can be true at the same time. I cannot be a Trumpist as well as I can actually see with my eyes what's going on. So Sean Hannity had a piece this morning, you know, the network you're not supposed to listen to, saying just stop watching them because they have lost all trust. And, you know, like Joe Scarborough from the Morning Joe, I don't know if you remember that segment where he came out and he's, you know, like just before, you know, like before Biden stepped down from the election, saying, you know, if you question him, Joe Biden's mental acuity, F you, this is the best Biden ever. And he went on and on and on and on, just, you know, like calling out people. It really has eroded the trust in these people because so many people knew what was going on, and they're basically what you can see with your eyes, what you can hear, and then you're told that you shouldn't believe your eyes. And how many times, even stories here in Canada, similar type stuff, what you can see and hear. I mean, I remember you being called out when you're questioning things. Isn't that our job as an opposition MLA to question things, as media to question things?
Yeah, I still have physicians that send me articles about how vitamin D is a really good immune booster, and how difficult it's been since since there was a real attack on that vitamin. So, but I do think that you pressed on something really important, and I think that it's a point that we have to make, and that is that the media has gone from being very adversarial towards political parties and politicians to being one of the means and mechanisms that are used to prop them up. I mean, we're dealing with our own sort of misinformation in the whole elbows up campaign that turns out to be like, oh, no elbows up, because there actually isn't anything to there. You know, the counter tariffs were already released, 13 days before the election. That's really alarming that kind of information was not populated in a more adversarial way when those claims were being made. And to see the way that that Prime Minister Carney is now treating President Trump, it's like, what happened to this whole like gotta be tough on Trump sort of attitude? And I think that the Canadian people deserve better, and I think that also we need to start holding our media's feet to the fire in a greater measure.
I think even in Canada it's worse, because in the U.S. they have the Fox News and the CNNs, and they kind of have like that balance. And some people say they wouldn't watch Fox, some wouldn't watch CNN, but they do have like opposing thoughts at least, right? And I think in Canada, we don't. We have the media, the national media, that is beholding to the Liberal government because they're the ones that are holding the paycheck. I mean, yeah. If we look at the CBC, what they did, Pierre Poilievre was going to repeal Bill C-18. He was going to fund local independent journalism. He was going to spend federal dollars with local independent journalism and cut the funding for English-speaking CBC. Carney, on the other hand, said he was just going to give CBC a raise. What did they do right away? They gave the executives a raise so that they wouldn't have to do bonuses. They topped them up because they said they were underpaid. They didn't give anything to the reporters, but they gave themselves a raise. Is that like a thing like, hey, we helped you win the election and here's payday? What is that? If I was cynical, I would say that's what that was.
Yeah, and I think that the reason, like, even having that amount of doubt means that there's too much conflict involved, right? I remember having a really great, conversation with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner for British Columbia, and Victoria Gray. And one of the things that she said is it's not avoiding conflict; it's avoiding the appearance of conflict. And that right now is where we're at as Canadian public. And I don't know if you saw the polls that came out this morning or yesterday morning, but basically, I think the polls came out yesterday morning, that they were covered today. But basically, Canadians have lost faith in the politicians, and Canadians have lost faith in their media. That's why they're consuming, alternative media in different ways. That's why X has the popularity that it does, is because it is one of the last unbridled, social media websites. And I think that some of those reporters that we see, the Sam Coopers, the Kim Bolins, Penny Daflos, the ones that are really hunting down the truth. I mean, they're being called lunatics in certain ways, but in the end, they're being shown to be true and to be right. And I mean, Kim Bolin did that six edition expose on the on how the gangs were distributing fentanyl and using BC as its base, and she was tracking it. She basically was embedded inside of some of these gangs, and in some of the ports, etc. I mean, unbelievable journalism. But ultimately, she wins an award. But she's it fades into obscurity until Trump says something. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, that's not true. It's only 1%. It's like, wait a second. I happen to remember that it's a lot more than that. And, the Sam Coopers have been sounding the alarm bell. And all of a sudden, it's Nash that comes out and says, yeah, here's some statistics for you, and here's the raw data for you to consume. And ultimately, it shows how much, is actually happening in British Columbia, showing Sam Cooper to be absolutely correct. So I think that we have to do a better job, and I think that we have a lot more work to really not just hold our politicians accountable, but also, our media outlets.
Yeah, Jake Tapper in his interview with Megyn Kelly, he said the Conservatives were right and the left-leaning media was wrong, and he said that. And Megyn Kelly definitely just she's a good journalist. She pounced on because they were all shamed and they were all like cancel culture and all that kind of stuff. And the same thing in Canada, like why the CBC and CTV did not press on the non-disclosure, all those things they should have been pressing on, they didn't press on those things. They definitely pressed on Pierre Poilievre, but they did not press on Mark Carney the way they should have. And here we are now. We find out a lot of the stuff wasn't even true to begin with.
And ultimately, that's where the difficulty in having a state funded or a state propped up media is actually really dangerous. If we don't. Even the best reporters, even the best producers, despite their desires, are going to have this thought in the back of their mind, you threaten me because of, you're going to threaten my livelihood, but this other one doesn't. And as much as they could try to be unbiased, that's got to, resound in some way, shape, or form for them. And I can't imagine that you could lack any bias when your very livelihood is at stake.
Well, I mean, even someone said the the quiet part out loud when they said during some of the questioning, just like, better be careful your questioning or your funding will get cut. I mean, what's that? And then when they tried Buttongate, I mean, that should have been a massive story, but it quickly got kind of just, and those people didn't even get fired. They quickly got shoved under the rug and said, there's a couple of people that went rogue or whatever. Like, that should have been like pressed on like crazy by CBC. They get our money they should be doing the work.
And that's where I'm hoping that more and more listeners and watchers will start finding other valuable sources of information. You mentioned, Jim, earlier that, in the US, you can at least go to Fox News and CNN. I watch both of those, right? And I don't watch them, as much as maybe others do, but you do get this balanced approach when you take part in both. And I think that that's one of the dangers here, is that we don't get enough of the balance. So I'm not saying consume any one thing, because I think there's a danger in that. It's like it truly is, fill your algorithm with, if you find yourself getting fed the same thing over and over again, try and just start liking other things that might maybe bug you a little bit, but you'll start finding your algorithm shift.
And then use your brain and common sense and say, that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? When they tell you something, because they made up that whole thing in the US about cheap fakes. Like, they made up words, right? Like this, you can't watch that video, that's a cheap fake. And, like Fox was saying, we just ran it the way it was. And here in Canada, you dare say that you watch Fox News and they'll, they right away, they want to label you and tell you you're just like, you're crazy and all this stuff. And it's just ridiculous, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. But they do have so many big names in the US that counteract a lot of that stuff. Fox being the #1 station in America, like as far as cable news networks goes. But then they have the Megyn Kellys, the Joe Rogans, the Stephen A. Smiths, even Bill Maher. He's a political analyst, I would say, more than a comedian these days.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're seeing a lot of the comedians turn, into these like political satirists, right? So, I mean, there's a whole new genre out that really is all about that. So I do think, and it's like the jesters that used to be in the courts, right? They were the ones that would draw attention to the things that nobody was talking about, the elephants in the room. And I think that comedians they've tried to silence comedians, right? Because comedians say the loud or the quiet part out loud as well. So I do think that there is a lot to to really take watch in right now, because when government starts controlling your media sources and what you can listen to and what you can't listen to, I think it's a very dangerous time and season for us.
Yeah, the foundation of a strong democracy is a free and independent press, and we do not have that in Canada right now. Bill C-18 is definitely crushing local independent media and propping up certain media, selected media outlets.
Yeah, I actually tweeted about that. That was one of the other ones that the NDP really went after me for at one point was, I tweeted out a bunch of different silenced individuals, some on the left, some on the right. But one of the ones I used was Dr. Julian Summers, who had been ordered to destroy all of his database. And then the other one was another one of the 3 or 4 that I used was Jordan Peterson. And I was, called all sorts of names in terms of being anti-trans, et cetera. And my quote was this: not supporting for or against either one of those particular gentlemen or woman. The third one was Jody Wilson-Raybould, which tends to be more left-wing there. But I said, when you silence the voices around the table, you will lose democracy. And I think that's true. Like, we don't need voices to go silent and voices to go quiet, or voices to be silenced, or voices to be shoved down. That's where you get dangerous. Like, that's when you get, civil unrest, right? Is when those voices feel like they don't have a place to actually speak. And it's not about, unanimity, unanimity. It's about actually consensus and trying to draw all of those voices out and pull them into the center and find common ground. And right now we are in a dangerous place where that is not occurring.
Yeah, discourse is important, and that's how democracy is born, where you listen to the voice. And democracy is meant to be messy. During the Second World War, Winston Churchill still held Parliament and let the voice, the screaming match, as Ian would tell you if he was here, and let them scream at each other, because that is what democracy is, not proroguing government and just doing everything in the shadows. Like this year, how long will the MPs sit? And they're getting stuff done under the cover of, nobody gets to scrutinize it, right?
You know what I saw recently? It's actually a publication of the parliamentary calendar for this year, and they will be.
We did it today as a meme.
They will be in Parliament. I believe it was 6 weeks total. Yeah. Of an entire year. And the Twitter or the tweet that I read actually had all of their salaries and then what they were actually going to be working and the amount that they were going to be working. It was disgusting is what it was. And for me, that says it all. That is like an absolute abuse of their positions and what they should be doing. And Carney's excuse of not being able to come up with a budget because it was summertime, that is brutal and a very disgusting way to run government.
Yeah, Ian's doing a story right now where Netanyahu is calling out Mark Carney by name for the 2 deaths in the United States, where 2 Israeli people were killed coming out of a museum, I think it was.
Yeah, no, they were coming out of an event that was being held at a museum. It was an event with a whole bunch of dignitaries. Yeah, so here, I want to go back to what you're saying, because I think that's really important. But a backbencher gets paid $211,000, a minister $311,500, a Secretary of State $284,500, and the Prime Minister $420,000, basically $419,600. Their work calendar has them working a total of 6 weeks.
Pretty good gig.
Disgusting. That's what I say. That's what I say. That is an absolute abuse of the taxpayer.
Even more disgusting than that is all the stuff that's happening that's not allowed to be scrutinized by the opposition. Do you know what I mean? Like the questions, like where does the opposition get to ask questions? If it's just at the podium and doing press conferences and they don't even show up for peers lots of time, you know what I mean? So obviously the messaging is a lot easier if you have friendly media when you're pushing out messaging instead of being scrutinized. That's what it's for. That's what Parliament's for.
And it also puts on record. Like the thing about Parliament is that everything is recorded and all of those words are kept in perpetuity. Yeah. And that is why it's like as if you are in a court. Every word that you say is recorded and can be counted on. And so not having parliament is actually a very dangerous place. They can change their mind on, when they're with a reporter, or a reporter can, interpret it however they want to. And right now we are in a dangerous state, and I don't want to undermine that. So you were saying that Netanyahu is actually calling out Carney because of the comments that he made about Israel and about the deaths, etc. for those deaths. That's I haven't read that yet, so that's very surprising.
Ian should have that up here in a bit, or it might be up already right now. And then, obviously, if we look at the media's reaction yesterday, Donald Trump, the president, had the South African president there in his Oval Office there, and then and he actually showed him some of the stuff that was going on, and then the media, actually, not all the media, but a lot of the left-leaning media, put out stories saying that it was baseless claims, and would actually, again, you're watching it with your eyes, and you could say that the claims aren't substantiated or something like that, but baseless claims, I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's just continued gaslighting.
Yeah, and this one, you and I have gone and had this conversation before. I'm not a huge Trump fan. I don't like his methodologies a whole lot. This was a real shock and awe. It was awkward and uncomfortable for me to even watch, in its entirety. But what I saw was the left media kind of came out and said these are baseless claims. But but all over social media, you saw a lot of testimonials being, talked about as like, well, no, this is the experience. No, here's another video. Here's another clip. Here's another, situation. This is something that's happening right now in real time. And what I was seeing was an actual, very powerful, almost voice that was collecting to say, thank you, someone, for seeing us. Thank you, someone, for calling it out and for, giving us refuge, etc. So I do think that there is a lot more truth to what Trump was showing than what the president of South Africa was comfortable with. That's indeed.
Yeah, I watched it, and then I think NBC got the first question. Their question was, after watching that, was like they asked about the airplane.
Yeah, the media was not exactly on task there.
I'm just like, what? Like, and obviously Trump did his Trump thing. But yeah, the media needs to start being honest. I don't know. I think a lot of people have given up on a lot of the mainstream media, for sure. And if they don't want to tell the truth, I can't see why you would put yourself through the torture of watching it.
And I think we also need to ask the question, like, why was the media not more provoked by what Trump had just shown? Why was the media not more, inquisitive about, about the white genocide that is being called for, and why is it so much more popular to see that happening with other races or other nations and being really drawn attention to? And I don't just say white or black. I mean, you can look in other countries too and see genocides occurring where they're just being completely ignored, and yet others are kind of at the forefront. And so I do think that we have to reinvent things in a better way, in a different way, so that the general public is more informed and can make their own decisions based on what's transpiring.
Who's left to hold Mark Carney responsible? He was sworn in now as an MP and as the Prime Minister, and they did release their 7 kind of like priorities, and they're mostly very, very vague. There's not anything in there. I don't know if you read the priorities, but they're very, very vague. There's not like, Pierre had the 10 projects that he was going to fast track and all these things. He had actually identifiable targets, but a lot of this is just very vague language, like spending less on government so Canadians can invest more in people and businesses. What does that mean, right? Becoming the strongest economy in the G7, establishing a new economic security relationship with the United States, and strengthening our collaboration. It was like somebody at a university project wrote it, and it was just full of buzzwords, but no meaning and no. If you were to write goals for yourself like that, you'd be like, I'm going to be a better person tomorrow.
It's a scary thing. It's a really scary thing. And the reality is that right now, Canada has a huge issue. Our population growth, from February of 2024 was up by 1.25 million. Basically our home building has hugely lagged, but our GDP is scary, like absolutely scary. And, when you look at our GDP per capita, it's even worse. It's even worse. And Carney has to know that. He is an economist at heart, right?
Take oil and gas out, then what does it look like?
Oh, it's horrific, right? It's just horrific.
Right.
And the Canadians, and we started this whole segment by talking about gaslighting. Canadians feel it. They feel like their paychecks are not going as far. They're not getting ahead. The companies don't have money to pay people more. Productivity is so bad compared to American companies right now. It's just ridiculous. And so there's this like huge tension that's created between what they're being told and what they're feeling. And it's cognitive dissonance. It's not making sense for people right now. So I think Carney, his big vague, priorities, just gives him a lot of latitude. Without a budget, he can spend however he wants to, and without really any accountability, and without calling Parliament for any significant amount of time, nothing is really going to change. Those are not great, ways to actually move forward or to start things off. And if I was Carney's advisors, I'd be telling him, like, you got to get moving here, and you got to get some things that you can actually be held accountable for, because this is not going to work. And right now, I mean, we're being downgraded and reforecast for a lot less GDP growth than what was originally anticipated. So it's going to be a difficult time ahead in terms of the economy.
Yeah, a couple of really big ones, and this is the biggest danger sign I see upcoming, is the majority of Canadian wealth is tied up in their homes, in their real estate. 53% of Canadians right now feel they can't meet their mortgage obligations. And that's scary as renewals come up at higher rates, much higher rates. We're seeing downward pressure on home prices right now. And it's a scary place for a lot of Canadians. 53%, that's a scary number. And then the other one is the TD economists come out and saying that 100,000 jobs will be lost in the next little while. And,
well, you're seeing more and more of those announcements. Announcement like TD is cutting, 25% of its staff. That's a huge number. That's a bank that has a lot of money and a lot of profit still, even with the huge penalty that they paid. And the Economic Times, the signals are there that we do not have any sort of strength, any sort of movement forward. And like the real GDP per capita, we're looking at Canada at 55,000. United States is at 73.
And we used to be higher than them. Yeah.
And we used to be higher than them. So that is a number one. And, some of the economists that I'm talking to right now are saying that a lot of it is our own doing, our productivity measures and all of the concessions that have been made towards employees and the employment standards and how things have progressed. And on the one hand, you want to say, well, those are great measures that are being put into place that are protecting employees, et cetera. And on the other, it's like, well, we now have, 13 paid stat days a year. And we've got, these employment health taxes that are being paid by employers. And you're looking at all of the different things that erode productivity for companies. And you're like, well, that's why we can't pay people more. Like, there's a 6%, gravy that gets paid to either government or to, employees that, 5 personal sick days every single year that no longer need, any sort of documentation. I mean, all of these are really pushing our productivity lower at a time when Canada desperately needs to move forward.
Yeah, I've talked to a few local employers here, and they say that they can't even grow now in their own minds because of that employer health tax. They say that they don't want to get their payroll over $1 million, and we used to be 500,000, and it wasn't for the opposition fighting to change that. So they're saying that they just don't want to, so they can't even give people raises because they don't want to go over that threshold.
Absolutely, and it's and I mean, what we're seeing is also a malaise within the population. You know, they don't really want to work any harder because they can't see themselves getting ahead. They can't see themselves working, you know, any amount to actually push, you know, push their own lifestyle or their own, you know, measures forward. That is a really nihilistic state to be in, and you know, for me, it's like, how do we kind of wake everyone up and kind of shake everyone into like, no,
Yeah.
there is a better way to do things, and there are ways that we can get ahead, and we have to stop relying so heavily on just real estate growth to see that. And you know, I was having a conversation with you know, around a dinner conversation just recently, and they were saying, well, yeah, that's why I've invested in the stock market, and I was like, oh, the TSX, and they're like, no, no.
Even the CPP doesn't invest in the Canadian market. 42% of the investments right now of the Canadian pension plan are invested in the United States.
Absolutely. I was talking to someone who represents the Ontario pension plan, one of the largest pension plans in all of, or the Ontario teachers pension plan, sorry, one of the largest in all of Canada. And they were saying, yeah, we moved to Canada because we have to make money for our, you know, for
US,
our
yeah.
stakeholders, we moved our money into the US. And literally I'm sitting there just gobsmacked. And, you know, his comment back was, well, as soon as Canadian companies start doing better, we'll bring our money back. And it's like, oh my goodness, chicken or egg. Like, Canadian companies can't do better because they don't have investments in them, but who wants to invest in them when they're up against a bureaucratic nightmare in terms of trying to, you know, be productive?
Yeah, but if you listen to the comments of who's in charge of our economy now, Melanie Joly, she said, she did an interview with CBC and said that that they're reaching out to universities like Harvard to attract the best and brightest from there. And I'm just like, with what? Pay them a third of what they can get paid there, and double the taxation and twice the regulation? Like, what is the attractant right now?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you're going to appeal to their politics, maybe that's about it. You're going to but they're going to go where the money is. And right now, I mean, I worked in the mine industry. I was a controller. 20 years to get a mine permitted. We have tons of natural resources. Everybody recognizes that. And I don't think anybody in Canada doesn't understand that we are the richest resource nation by diversity in the world. You just can't get at it. It's like our healthcare system. We have free healthcare if you can get it.
Absolutely. Well, and right now you're not going to get it. I mean, that's a very difficult reality. But yeah, our healthcare system is such that it's very difficult unless you're in an acute state to get the measures you need. I just saw that Dr. Brian Day, who you know, took our healthcare system to all the way to the Canadian Supreme Court, just wrote a book. So I'm looking forward to actually reading it, because I think he did, in the course of his fight, it wasn't really about his fight anymore. And I had the privilege of interviewing him last year. You know, his fight turned into an expose more than it was actually trying to get anything to change. It was about, you know, I know that I'm not going to see anything, you know, happen in my direction, but I really just want people to understand, you know, what they're up against. And just to your point, Jim, I wanted to bring a statistic so that everyone has an idea of what prosperity looks like when you are actually firing on all cylinders with your oil and gas sector. And that's Norway, 90,000 per real GDP per capita, compared to Canada's 55,000. So literally double what we are right now.
And also $300,000 per capita in their sovereign wealth fund.
Yes, a sovereign wealth fund that Alberta would have actually more than that if they weren't giving payments to transfer payments. Yeah.
Let's move on to the Alberta type stuff, where the Western premiers finish up talks on trade in Yellowknife there. Beautiful place to go, by the way. If you've never been to Yellowknife, you want to see the Northern Lights, that's the place to go. And they were up there talking, and Premier Daniel Smith obviously wants pipelines. And David Eby said that you know, the West is the economic engine of Canada. He should have said Alberta and Saskatchewan are the economic engine, and BC used to contribute to that engine, but you know, basically have killed mining and forestry in British Columbia, so we're no longer the part of that economic engine. What I think the only thing left for British Columbia can really claim fame to is our coastline, which Alberta needs, Saskatchewan needs. You know, it has one of the best ports and with access to the world. So, but mining and forestry definitely sucking. And then, you know, he also tried to shame Danielle Smith by saying that she needs to quell the separatist talk.
Yeah, and I think that, if I don't see some action really quickly on the interprovincial, which is the low hanging fruit, getting over ourselves and actually
Yeah.
seeing the interprovincial, taxation and levies come down, and free trade going in, between all of us, I'm going to call them all disingenuous. They all have, that is within the provincial purview to affect positive change for all of its citizens. And right now, I'm seeing a lot of lip service, but not a lot of action. And that's what I'm going to, really judge each of these premiers according to. And if we don't see it, then we know that they're not really that serious about prosperity for its citizens.
I can tell you right now, if you want to quell this separatist talk, announce that you are in favor of the Northern Gateway Pipeline. Recognize that Alberta and Saskatchewan are the golden goose of Canada, and help them get to market to help all Canadians with prosperity.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It seems simple, doesn't it? It seems like if we were sitting there today, if you and I were sitting in office, we could say, hey, where's our money? Where's our cash? Where's our ability to make money? Where is it? We know it's Alberta. Like, who doesn't know it's Alberta and Saskatchewan? Who doesn't know? BC is so mired in regulation. So how do we get that product to market so we don't have to take a discount on Western Canadian Select, because the only customer we have is the United States, who is kind of, knows that and also is playing hardball with us.
And really, we need to wise up, and educate ourselves on some of the realities that we're dealing with. BC is oftentimes very, virtuous in how we see our energy sources, and our hydro is one of our golden stars, and we celebrate the fact that we're electrifying, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, right now, we are on track right now this year to get 70% of our electricity from Alberta and Washington State. And what they build their electricity with is natural gas. Well, we can still feel good about our emissions because we don't have to count those emissions because it's not produced here, it's just consumed here. So we get to continue our virtue signaling while, massacring Alberta and Washington State for how they are creating their energy, except that we desperately need their energy because it's a more reliable source than our hydro, which is affected by droughts right now, our solar, which is, not to the state where it should be, and wind, which is erratic at best. So, really right now we have a very difficult energy situation that we've put ourselves in, and in doing so, are reliant on all of those who have the oil and gas that we are so desperately against. And so I think it's time for us to wake up and really focus on what we need in terms of great paying jobs and great prosperity for for all of our residents, and keep moving forward.
I just want to remind the viewers, though, that we're not climate deniers and all that stuff. Both Renee and I drive electric vehicles. You can do both. Be pragmatic and recognize that our strength and our resources are Canada's strength. And also, by selling LNG to the rest of the world, we actually bring down carbon emissions. It's just this nonsense of stopping oil and all this stuff and is impoverishing Canadians. And so many right now are stressing about making a mortgage payment, about putting food on the table, can't pay their rent, can't build a house, all those things, because we deny the greatest assets that's sitting there. And to the point where many Albertans and Saskatchewans say they've had enough, right, of being treated like the ugly stepsister when they're the ones paying the bills.
Absolutely. And I do think that we need to, focus on the things that bring us prosperity. For the other reason is that we produce it with less emissions than everywhere else in the world. And I think we can continue to do so. I think that we can continue to innovate and continue to lower the overall global emissions and actually do a way better job than what we could do by just simply, ceasing to exist here in BC and lowering the global emissions by, 0.16% versus actually lowering global emissions by 3 times what all of Canada's emissions are, which are 1.6% of the total world. So we would lower global emissions by 5% if we could get our LNG off of our border and out to India, where it could be used to replace coal.
Yeah, for all you Canadians out there that don't understand basic economics, but you do understand hockey because your elbow's up, I'll put it to you this way. Our superstar.
Or basketball. Basketball is almost up to
Our superstars are Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, all these people, Bobby Orr, all these names, Connor McDavid and all that stuff. That's our oil and gas, our LNG, our uranium, our natural resources, our mining. They're backbenchers right now. They're not even allowed to be going on the ice. You know, like they get to come on every now and then. And we're putting out junior B players, solar, wind, and these are the green projects. They may be superstars in the future one day, maybe in the future, but they're not right now. They're not right now.
And it's not an either or conversation. Yeah. I think that's where I really fatigue on the whole environmental aspect. And I can go head to head with environmentalists and honestly, I am so pro the world. We have one atmosphere, we have one world, we have one water system, we have one, we need to start thinking like that in a global mindset. But in order to do that, we're not going to get there in an either or world. We're going to get there in an and world. And we need to focus on how do we continue to lower emissions on oil and gas while, really fostering innovation and technological growth on other aspects. The world is also consuming more and more energy and will continue to do so, not just with population growth, but with new technologies like AI. AI requires a tremendous amount of water and water sources and energy sources, and we have to keep, moving that dial forward. And I'm not even going to get into super controversial topics like here, but I could go there. And we really need to start thinking in a very different way. And start really focusing on, like you said, what do each of us have that in a really positive way, and what do we bring to the table, and how can we maximize that as a country? And I think in doing so, the U.S. and the threat of tariffs would fall off into the far gone past, because we would have so many opportunities beyond those borders.
Absolutely, and I don't want to keep us too long as well, but we could talk all day. And I know that forestry is a big one in British Columbia here. They've put together I don't know if you saw, a committee to study the problem. I'm just like, we know what the problem is. It doesn't need to be studied, right?
And Jim, in the 4 years that I was an MLA, and in the time before and after that, I think this will be in the NDP's government. I think this will be their fourth or fifth committee that has studied this exact issue and has not come to any meaningful path forward.
You know what the biggest complaint of this committee is?
No.
Next to no industry representation. Imagine that.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine that, right? And then here's Canfor, and it says, invest in Canada or go to the US? Less regulation, fast-tracking projects, less taxation. Tough call, right? Tough call. And then the Unifor labor, like the union head, came out and said that Canada needs to start seizing assets of corporations that decide they want to go to the United States. Now that in itself has got to be for some company that's deciding whether to invest in Canada or to invest in the United States. They look at that and they say, oh, well, Canada sounds like a great place, higher taxation, more regulation, and they're going to seize my assets. That seems like a great place to invest, doesn't it? Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. Like, if you have $1 billion in capital, where are you going to spend it?
No. And I mean, if we haven't figured out that bureaucracy and rules and regulations tell companies to go elsewhere, then yeah, we don't know what's happening in the rest.
And the welcome mat is out. They've got over $10 trillion in investment in 3 months there with Trump in power. He's put the welcome mat out. He said, if you invest $1 billion, you're in. I'll fast track you and I'll give you less taxation, less of everything.
And some people are really critical of that aspect and of his planning, but the reality is that those are all jobs. Like when you're investing $1 billion, that is all jobs. That is all, and when you're investing $1 billion, that's after tax dollars. Those are dollars that have already been taxed somewhere, somehow, and are coming into the country. And so, those are jobs. That's infrastructure. That's new technology. That is, that's a huge boon, to the economy. And I think we can't underestimate that. For anyone who's really interested, take a look at Boise, Idaho, and what happened when Micron announced that they were going to do a $24 billion infrastructure investment there. Just take a look at what happened. Take a look at what happened to their university. Take a look at how Micron then came in and gave grants to university engineering students to actually propel their different projects forward. Take a look at what happened to the infrastructure of the entire Treasure Valley down in Idaho. Take a look at what happened to all the other companies. Take a look at their jobs report. Take a look at their population growth. One of the fastest growing municipalities in all of the U.S. If you want to see what infrastructure and investment dollars do for a community, look no further than that. And really, it's a great little microcosm. Another great microcosm to study would be Austin, Texas, and what they did for the tech industry and what happened and transformed and changed their entire city's economy.
And smaller examples based on our resource sector in Canada, Fort Mac. Those communities somebody didn't decide that they're going to start a town in Fort Mac because it was a great place to have a town. High level Alberta, these Fort St. John, Dawson Creek, all these towns sprung up from resources. And I mean, that's Canada's strength. Mines bring in lots of money, lots of good jobs, and also build hospitals, build schools, all those kind of things, right? That's how Canada's north and non-metro areas are populated, through our resource sector.
And if anyone ever has the opportunity to go and visit, Fort McMurray is a great exercise in private industry coming into a town and creating it. They have more infrastructure, and we're talking public pools and public ice skating rinks and all of this paid for by the oil and gas sector. So
Suncor's name is going to be on so many things there, right? And they don't put it big and bold. They just put a little thing there, right? Like walk into any hospital, you're going to see this equipment donated by Kinross and different things, right? They do lots of stuff. And because they've been shamed into being quiet about what they do, Canadians only need to go look at the TSX, see who dominates the TSX. It is Canadian resource companies.
I would say the other thing too to really look at and take a good look at are the Indigenous communities around those areas. They've also really become very prosperous, and a lot of the companies, Indigenous owned and led companies, have become some of the wealthiest in all of Canada. So it does have a spillover effect. It does really benefit all of the community, and I think that they're great lessons to learn for all of us in how we need prosperity back again. And again,
if you want
full circle to deal with that malaise of individuals who don't feel like they can get ahead regardless of how much money they make.
And if you want to do your part, you can actually reach out to media and say that's enough of this nonsense. Start telling us the truth. You can reach out to your MPs and your MLAs and everybody and say we need to repeal Bill 69, Bill C-48, Bill C-18. These bills are actually stopping freedom and prosperity, and that needs to change. Anything else you want to sum up with today?
No, I think that's it for me.
That was great. That was a great impassioned show for sure.
Yeah, and you know what? I hope that the only thing I will add is that when I talk, maybe I sound too alarmist, but I guess I'm trying to really sound an alarm bell so that we can all work on the solutions and work on the way forward and work on really getting to a better place. I've always encouraged my kids, see what's there today, but then move it forward. How do we, even if it's in a small way, a baby step? And so I love your encouragement about reaching out to MLAs and MPs, but get involved with communities and really be a part of the change forward.
Mark Carney's Liberals need a Jake Tapper moment when they go to Danielle Smith and they say they're sorry for what they've done, and that there'll be a better path forward, and that we'll get those resources to market. That would be unity for Canada and prosperity for Canada. Recognize what Alberta gives to Canada, and Saskatchewan for that matter. And then somebody should tell David Eby, this used to be one of the bigger contributing provinces in mining and forestry, and both of those are sick right now.
They are. They really are.
Anyway, thank you, Renee. And we do thank you for watching Now Media. And we'll see you next week. Until then, have a great weekend.